The Darker Season. Chapter 2, Scene 1, The Factory. The line moved at 6:40 in the morning, the same way it moved at 2:40 in the afternoon. It did not ask anyone's opinion. Michael Anderson did not mind. He had been on the line 14 months. He had figured out the difference between the men who minded and the men who did not. The ones who minded spent the whole shift somewhere else in their heads. They watched the clock. They counted pieces. They wanted to be done. The ones who did not mind were actually here. They paid attention to the small things: a bad batch of stock, a drift in the line speed, the smell of a bearing starting to go. He was the second kind. He had known this about himself since month 2, and he considered the knowledge useful. The Hartwell plant made industrial fittings, mostly copper, some brass. The work moved in stages a man could set his clock by. Michael worked finishing. He caught each piece at the end of its run, walked it through the 2-step inspection, and racked it or flagged it. Racking paid the same as flagging. He was here for accuracy, not numbers. The two were only in conflict if a man stopped paying attention. He paid attention. Dave Kowalski was working the station ahead of him. That made the morning easier. Dave was 43 and had been at Hartwell since 1971. His line rhythm was so reliable you could read a clock off it. He fed Michael's station the way a man feeds a station when he has made peace with the work, and Michael had learned early that a good upstream partner was the single best variable in a finishing run. "Sleep okay?" Dave said, without looking up. "Fine," Michael said. It was not the truth. He had slept the way a man sleeps when something at the edge of his attention is keeping a low watch on the door. He had been sleeping that way for months. He had not told anyone. There was nothing to tell that would carry into useful words. The dreams were not loud. They did not wake him shouting. They were simply there, a texture under the nights. The same images came back at irregular intervals with the patience of something in no particular hurry. The tire swing on the old maple. His uncle's voice from the wrong direction. The mailman at the end of the drive, standing very still, looking at the house. Gary Hollings, on second shift, had a brother who had passed out at work the year before. The doctors had eventually called it a seizure. Gary had asked Michael twice whether he had ever had anything like that happen to him. Michael had said no, both times. The second time he had thanked Gary for the concern and changed the subject. A doctor was not going to find anything wrong with him. He had been a different kind of wrong since he was 10 years old. He knew it the way he knew his name. He pulled a fitting from the rack, ran the first check, good, ran the second, good, racked it. The line moved. 14 months in finishing, and he was good at the job. Good at it was not the same as loving it, not the same as seeing his future in it. But there was a clean satisfaction in a thing done right, and he had that. He had known men at Hartwell who had worked the same stage at 22, at 40, at 58. Some of them looked hollowed out, settled into a life they had not noticed themselves settling into. Others did not. Dave did not. Dave had been here since 1971, and he knew himself. He had made an arrangement with his life and found it adequate. Michael was not sure yet what kind he was going to be. He thought about it sometimes, in the lower registers of his attention, while his hands did the work. He thought about what he wanted: a house, a life that was his, mornings that belonged to him. He thought about what was in the way of that, and that was a list he did not look at directly. He pulled another fitting. Ran the checks. Good. The line moved. At 2:30 the whistle went, and Michael clocked out, said goodbye to Dave, and walked into a spring afternoon that smelled of diesel and new grass in about equal measure. The plant sat on County Road 12 miles outside Willow's Bend proper. The drive home followed the county road south to State Route 48, then west into town. He made the drive twice a day, 5 days a week. His hands could do most of it without him. He did not let them today. Today, he kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and the radio turned low. The thing at the edge of his sleep had been a little closer this morning than it had been in a while. He had learned over the winter that the days when it came close in sleep were the days when it needed minding on the drive home. He was not sure what he was minding against. He did not look at Maple Grove Road when he passed the county marker for it. He almost did not look, The Chevette ran clean at highway speed. The engine hummed through the wheel. He had bought the car used in 1987 with 3 months saving. It was not impressive, but it was his, and it ran well. He kept it up the way his father had taught him. Pay attention to the small things before they got large. The radio was on low, a country station out of Chillicothe. Something he was not listening to, but which made the cab feel less empty. The dreams had started again in February. They had never fully stopped. From the fall of '86 through most of '88, they had stayed at a manageable distance. Background noise. The kind of thing a man could carry without it bleeding into the daylight. February had changed that. February had brought the tire swing back in detail he had not experienced since the nights right after it happened. The nights when he was 10 and 11 and 12, and the images had been so concrete, he had woken up certain they were in the room with him. He was 20 years old now. He did not wake up certain of things like that anymore. But February had brought the tire swing back. With it had come his uncle's voice from somewhere below the basement floor. That was not how it had happened. It was how it visited him. The dream rearranged the memory into something that worked on its own logic. And underneath both of those, like a bass note just at the edge of hearing, the mailman at the end of the drive. He had pushed it back every morning. He pushed it back now, on County Road 12. The Springfields ran out on either side. Green was coming up in the hedgerows. The sky was a clean, pale blue that had nothing in common with the air inside the dream. Ordinary day. Ordinary drive. Ordinary life. He was good at this. He told himself he was good at this. He turned onto Route 48 and headed for home. The Darker Season. Chapter 2, Scene 1. Home. The Anderson house on Walnut Street was the house Michael had grown up in, not the first one. The first had been the farmhouse on Maple Grove Road. They did not talk about that one anymore. After it, there had been the small place on Front Street in Willow's Bend, then a rental in Caldwell while his father worked the cannery, then a year in Harwick when the cannery closed and his father caught on at a tool and die shop, then Walnut Street. They had been here since Michael was 12. 8 years. Long enough that this was the house he meant when he said home. He moved through it without registering most of it. The light in the hallway in the afternoon, the squeak of the second step from the bottom, the way the back door caught if you did not lift it slightly as you turned the knob. His mother was in the kitchen. Barbara Anderson was 47. She had grown into her face. The prettiness of her 20s had given way to something settled and true, a quality that lived in how she carried herself more than in any single feature. She was small and plump. Her brown hair was pinned back the way she always pinned it. There was a small mole on her left cheek. Michael had been looking at his whole life. She was the most patient person he knew. Her faith was not a performance. It was the foundation she stood on. He had spent years trying to understand it from the outside. He had eventually accepted that he could not. She was cutting potatoes. The radio was on, the kitchen station, the afternoon program she listened to without particularly listening to. The gold locket she always wore sat against the front of her blouse. It had been her mother's. "You eat?" she said. "Burger at lunch." "That's not dinner." "I know. Your father's pulling overtime. Stan asked him to cover the new line." She moved the potatoes into the pot without looking up. "Pork chops. 20 minutes. "I'll wash up." He went upstairs to the bathroom and washed the plant off his hands and face. The smell of finishing stage clung to skin and clothing. It had its own quality. He had come to associate it with the working half of his life. He looked at himself in the mirror while he dried his hands. He looked like his father had looked at 20, or close to it. Same jaw. Same way of holding the eyes. The dark hair from his father's people. From his mother he had gotten the mouth and the quiet and the drawl, mild enough to live mostly in his word choices rather than the sounds, a rhythm more than an accent. His grandmother Mary's cross was around his neck. Mary had put it there herself the Christmas before she died when he was 14. He had not taken it off. He looked at himself a moment longer than he needed to. He did not look like a man who had bad dreams. He looked like a man who worked the finishing stage at a copper fittings plant in Wawasett County, Ohio. He looked like that man competently. He went back downstairs. His mother was at the range. He sat at the kitchen table and picked up the Wawasset County Courier. 2 days old. It came out twice a week. 2 days old was its normal state. He read the classifieds without purpose. Local listings. Farm equipment. A rental on Garfield Street that was either a small house or a large apartment, depending on how generous you were willing to be with the language. "Mrs. Peterson was asking after you," his mother said. "How is she?" "Hip is still giving her trouble. She said to tell you she appreciated the firewood." He had split wood for the Petersons in February, before the weather turned. They could not do it themselves anymore. There had been no further analysis required. "Tell her I'll check the stack next week." The kitchen smelled like onions and pork, and the bread and clean smell of the house. He associated it with home so completely that he rarely noticed it. He noticed it now. He had been noticing everything lately. He did not know if that was a symptom or a defense. His father came home at 6:15. Robert Anderson was 53. He had worked factory floors for 35 years. He had started at 18 and finished his GED at the same plant that hired him. The work had laid down on him the shape of a man who built things with his hands. 5'11". Sturdy. A small, honest gut he made no apology for. His hair had started turning white when he was 18, and by 53 was mostly white, salt with a few strands of pepper still holding on out of habit. Square jaw. Blue eyes. The dimples in his cheeks were the same dimples in old photographs of him at 20, except they sat now in a face weathered by 3.5 decades of plant lighting and shift work. He had come up at Hartwell originally, before Michael was born. The farmhouse years had ended that. After Aaron, after the move, Robert had taken whatever was nearest and steady. The cannery in Caldwell, the tool and die shop in Harwick. Then, the foreman job at Whitlock Manufacturing in Willow's Bend, which had finally settled them on Walnut Street. He had been at Whitlock 8 years. He ran the 3rd shift on the assembly floor, and the shift ran. He set his lunch pail on the counter by the back door, came into the kitchen, and kissed Barbara on the cheek. He had been doing it that way every evening, Michael could remember. It was not stale, it was how the evening began. "Long one?" Michael said. "Long enough." Robert poured a glass of water and sat at the table. "Henderson stopped me on the way out. Bearings on the grinder line are running hot again." "Same one that ate the belt in February?" "Same one." "Stan ever going to let you replace it?" "When it kills somebody, probably." Robert looked at the newspaper Michael had been reading. "Anything. Mrs. Peterson's hip." "Still?" "Still." Robert nodded and picked up the paper. Barbara brought the food to the table. They sat down together, and his father said grace the way he said grace, brief and specific, thanking God for specific things rather than general ones. It was a habit Michael had always appreciated, the precision of it, the implication that attention was being paid. They ate. The conversation moved through the ordinary territory of an ordinary evening. The back porch, which needed another season of patching, or this was the year they had to admit it needed replacing. Barbara's sister in Lexington, coming in May and staying a week. Michael's car, which had developed a noise in the front end. He had diagnosed it as the driver's side CV joint and had not gotten to it. Robert offered to help Saturday. Michael said he could probably manage. Robert said he knew that and was offering anyway. Michael said all right. They did not talk about the farmhouse. They had not talked about the farmhouse in years. Michael could not say when the last time had been. He could not point to the specific conversation or year either of his parents had said the word directly. Somewhere in his early teens. The silence had closed around the subject, quietly, by agreement, without any formal discussion of the agreement itself. He did not experience it as an absence. He experienced it as a shape in the room, a piece of furniture they had all learned to walk around without remarking on. His father had the grinder line, and his mother had the porch question, and Michael had the CV joint. None of them was sitting at the table with the farmhouse on Maple Grove Road, except that all of them were. He knew it the way he knew most things he did not examine directly. He knew it from his father's occasional glance across the dinner table, not often, not regularly, but present when it came. A quality of attention that belonged to a different category than the ordinary. Robert had looked at him that way the morning after October, not asking, not ready to ask, but looking. His mother's faith, the foundation under everything in her, was also, Michael suspected, what let her hold the shape in the room without it crushing the room. You could believe that God had reasons, and also believe the reasons did not require full comprehension. You could live inside that. Michael had been living inside a version of it himself for 10 years. He helped clear the table. His father went to the front room with the newspaper and the radio. His mother stayed in the kitchen. Michael stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame, watching her at the sink, deciding whether he had anything to say that would not require explaining everything he was not ready to explain. "You sleep okay?" she said. He recognized the question from the morning. He recognized where she had gotten it. She had been watching him for 20 years. She had the vigilance of a woman who knew what her son did and did not tell her. "Fine," he said. She looked at him. Her hands were in the dishwater. She was deciding whether to say more. She did not. "Night, Mom." "Night, Michael." He went upstairs. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while in the dark, the familiar dark of the room he had slept in since he was 12. The house settled around him. His grandmother's cross was warm from his skin. He lay down and did not dream of anything. Or if he did not remember it by morning. The Darker Season, Chapter 2, Scene 3. Church Sunday. First Methodist Church of Willow's Bend had stood on the corner of Church Street and Maple Avenue since 1908. By Michael's count, it had been freshly painted about 3 times in all those years. That was not entirely fair, but it caught the essential quality of a building that was deeply rooted and not particularly interested in appearances. The interior was different. The interior was a room tended by people who loved it. Pews polished from use, windows clean. The floor solid and cared for, mopped on Saturdays by volunteers who meant what they were doing. Michael had been coming here most of his life. The weight of the place was its own comfort, the smell of it. Hymnals and candle wax and old wood. The sound of the congregation settling before the service began. He sat with his parents in the third pew left of center, where the Andersons had always sat. No one had ever formalized it. Everyone understood. The Sinclairs sat in the back row. They had sat there since the first Sunday they came, 8 months ago. That was where they had stayed. He was aware of Quinn, the way he was always aware of Quinn. Completely. Without being able to help it. He had not been able to help it since the 3rd Sunday they had attended. She had turned to say something to her mother and had caught him looking. She had not done anything with the information for long enough that he understood it was deliberate. She was deciding something. She would tell him what she had decided when she was ready and not before. She had told him 2 weeks later by asking if he knew where the library was. He had known where the library was since he was 6. He had walked her there, and they had talked for 40 minutes on the steps before she went inside. He had driven home and sat in the car in the driveway for 10 minutes because something in those 40 minutes had rearranged things he had not understood needed rearranging. That had been 6 months ago. Since then, they had become the thing 2 people become when they are becoming something, and neither of them has used the word for it yet. Sunday dinners at his parents' house or hers, small places that did not require planning. She came to the library 3 times a week, and he had developed a reading habit that was not entirely about the books. Quinn Sinclair was sitting in the back pew with her parents and her younger brother Thomas. She was wearing a blue dress the color of the sky in early morning before it has decided what it is going to be. She was paying attention to the service the way she paid attention to everything, entirely present. The rest of the room was something she was aware of without being distracted by. She was not looking at him. She did not need to look at him to know he was there. David Sinclair was an engineer. He had spent 15 years at a firm in Dayton before deciding Dayton was the wrong place to raise a family. He had moved them to Wawasek County on the basis of a property his wife's family had held for years and never used. He was a quiet man. The precision had passed to his daughter, though in Quinn, the precision was moral rather than technical. Linda Sinclair was the kind of woman who made things easier for everyone around her without anyone noticing she was doing it. It was its own form of intelligence. He had not told Quinn about the farmhouse. He had not told her about the zombie siege in March of '85 or about October on Maple Grove Road. He had not told her about the dreams, the specific content of them, the mailman at the end of the drive. He had not told her what his life had contained before he was 11, before the Andersons had moved off the farm and into the version of themselves that did not include what had happened there. He had tried once, or he had gotten close to trying, which was a different thing, but felt adjacent. He would try again. He told himself this, standing beside Quinn in the parking lot of First Methodist on a Sunday morning in April, the spring air promising things without specifying exactly what. He would find the moment, and he would tell her. His mother was calling him over to settle some arrangement about dinner next Sunday. He moved to where he was needed. Quinn watched him go with the particular expression she wore when she was making a note she was not ready to share. The Darker Season, Chapter 2, Scene 4. The Drive-In. The Wawasek County Drive-In Theatre on State Route 22 had been operating since 1959. It showed every sign of intending to operate indefinitely. Michael respected this about it. He respected most things that kept doing what they were built to do without requiring recognition for it. It ran 3 screens on weekend nights from April through October. Double features most nights. The programming was a mix of whatever the distributor sent and whatever the owner, a man named Ray Callaghan, personally wanted to show. The combinations were occasionally philosophically interesting. Tonight was a thriller on screen 2. He had seen the title on the marquee when he passed by earlier that day. They pulled up to the booth and paid. He had not paid much attention beyond that. Quinn was in the passenger seat. She had her feet up on the dash the way she sometimes did when she was comfortable. Blue canvas sneakers. The drive-in speaker was hooked over his window. The sun was going down behind the tree line at the back of the lot. The first pink of it showed through the windshield. He bought 2 Cokes at the concession stand and came back to the car. "What is this one?" she said. She was looking at the screen, which currently showed a preview for something involving a submarine. Thriller. Something about a house. "You didn't read the poster. I read enough of it. You read thriller." "I read thriller and starring, and then the names didn't mean anything to me." She took one of the Cokes. "That's fine. I wanted to talk anyway." "We can do both," he said. "We usually do." The feature started. A family moved into a house that did not want them there. Michael had certain feelings about that subject. He was not going to examine them this evening. He watched the opening. He watched Quinn watch it. She had her focused attention, which she brought to everything. He noticed she was doing the thing she sometimes did at films, letting the story come to her instead of going to meet it. He had been thinking about this evening since Tuesday. He had a thing to tell her. He had the shape of it, the outline, the general territory of the words required. He had been assembling it all week, picking up the pieces and fitting them together until he had something he could use. He had done this before. He had gotten close before. In October, he had been within 2 sentences of the beginning of it when the car died on Maple Grove Road, and the whole evening had gone a direction he had not anticipated. But that was the problem. Everything in his life that needed saying connected to everything else that needed saying. The connections were the trap. You pulled on one thread, and the whole thing came with it. The easiest thing in the world was to leave it alone. He was going to start tonight. He had been watching the film for 40 minutes, long enough to know it was competently made, long enough to know Quinn's assessment of it was going to be measured and specific when she gave it. He had been watching for the natural breaks in tension a thriller produced, the moments when the story breathed, when he could say something without it landing wrong. Quinn was watching the screen. He turned toward her slightly. "Quinn," he said, "I need to tell you something." She turned her head, not all the way, enough to register that she was listening. "Something I should have told you a while back," he said. He kept his voice level. He was doing all right. "About why I am the way I am sometimes. The dreams. The October thing I didn't explain. The way I go quiet when somebody mentions Maple Grove Road. She was fully looking at him now. Her face had shifted into its most serious register. Not alarm. The expression of someone who had been waiting for a conversation and was now making room for it. "Okay," she said. The screen went bright. The score climbed. On the screen, the house did something houses were not supposed to do. The family met what they had moved into. The little window speaker did what those speakers did. It clipped. It overmodulated. It made the whole thing louder than it needed to be. More shock than fidelity. It worked anyway. Quinn grabbed his arm. Both of them were looking at the screen. The sequence ran for about 90 seconds. Michael had to concede it was effectively done. Not cheap. Not gratuitous. The kind of thing that worked because the film had spent 40 minutes earning it. He could feel his heart in his chest. "Sorry," Quinn said, letting go of his arm. She settled back. That was good. She gave it the clean assessment of someone who had evaluated the sequence and found it technically successful. He turned back toward the windshield. "You were saying," she said. He looked at the screen. The sequence had ended. The story was breathing again, regrouping. The family on the screen was in the kitchen, doing what people in these films always did afterward, trying to be normal about it. He thought about starting again. He had the words still. They were right there. "Never mind," he said. He did not know why he said it, or he knew exactly why, and did not want to look at why. Quinn looked at him. He could feel the quality of her attention without turning to meet it. "Okay," she said. She said it without pressure, without edge. The way she accepted things, she was going to come back to later on her own terms. It was worse than if she had pushed him. If she had pushed him, he could have taken the push and used it for momentum. Instead, she had received it intact, the way she received everything, and filed it next to the other things she had filed, and he was on his own with what he had just done. He watched the rest of the film. It was good. The ending did not fully resolve. It left the darkness at the edge of the frame instead of banishing it. Michael thought that was probably more honest than the alternative. He drove her home at 10:30. They talked about the film. Her assessment was specific. His was less so. There was nothing wrong between them, except for the shape of the thing he had not said, which sat in the back seat of the Chevette the whole drive and did not make any noise. He walked her to the door of the Sinclair house. Her parents' light was on. Thomas had been in bed for 2 hours. "That was a good movie," Quinn said. "Yeah." She looked at him. In the porch light, she had the quality she sometimes had in church, a presence he had never fully found the word for. The porch light put the shadows where it put the shadows. "Michael." "Yeah. Whatever it is," she said, "you can tell me." She said it the way she said the things that mattered. Directly. Without softening, without hedging. She had already decided the outcome and was reporting it. He looked at her. "I know," he said. She went inside. He stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the spring night, the crickets starting in the hedgerow, a dog somewhere across the street. He went back to the car. He sat behind the wheel in the Sinclair driveway and looked at the steering column the way a man looks at something that has not done anything wrong. He had been 2 sentences from the start of it. He had opened his mouth and said her name, and she had turned and been ready, and the screen had gone bright, and the moment had collapsed, and he had taken the out. The universe handed him with a speed that surprised even him. He was ashamed of the relief, the exact shape of his own failure. He started the car. He drove home on routes that did not take him past Maple Grove Road. The Darker Season, Chapter 2. Scene 5. The Dream. He did not sleep right away. He lay in the dark of his room, with the spring night coming through the window he had cracked before bed. Walnut Street in April. Nothing happening. The ordinary quiet of a neighborhood at 11 o'clock on a Sunday evening. His grandmother's cross was warm against his sternum. He was thinking about Quinn's face in the porch light when she said, "Whatever it is, you can tell me." The absolute quality of it. He was thinking about what that meant. Quinn Sinclair did not say things she was not prepared to follow through on. She did not make offers she would reconsider. She had looked at him and decided, and told him what she had decided. The decision was intact. What he had done with it was take it home and go to bed. He was going to have to try again. He was going to have to find the moment and actually get through it. He thought about it for a while, forming and discarding versions of how it would go, until the thinking went soft, and the soft became something else. The tire swing was moving. There was no wind. The night air of the dream was perfectly still. The hollow around the old farm property on Maple Grove Road was silent the way the hollow was silent. Not empty, full of a specific attention. The quality of air in a room where someone has just been present and the presence has not fully dispersed. The ancient maple was above him, broader than he remembered. The tire swing turned slowly at the end of its chain. Nothing was making it turn. He was 10 years old in the dream. He knew he was not 10 years old. The dream had decided he was. He moved in it with the smaller body and the smaller stride of the boy he had been. The particular smallness of 10. The way everything is too big at that age. The porch steps too deep. The creek bed too far down from its bank. His uncle's voice came from somewhere below the yard. Not below, exactly. Below was not the right word for the direction. The voice came from the direction that was not available in ordinary space. The extra direction. The one that did not have a name in the geography he had been taught. His uncle said his name, and the sound was almost right, and the almost was everything. He did not move toward it. He had learned not to move toward it. He turned around, and the mailman was at the end of the drive. This was new. The mailman had not been at the end of the drive in this dream before. He had been in other dreams, other configurations, but not in this one. Not the farmhouse dream. Not standing where the gravel drive met Maple Grove Road, with the particular stillness the mailman had. Michael stood in the yard and looked at the mailman. The mailman did not move, did not gesture, did not do anything except be exactly where he was, at the end of the drive, with the stillness of something that had all the time it needed. Then the laugh came. Not loud, not close. At the very edge of what the dream would let him hear. The way a sound carries across still water at night. Present enough to be unmistakable. Distant enough to argue with. Almost the laugh of a man who had heard something worth laughing at. The almost was everything. His uncle's voice had the same quality from below the yard. Close but not right. The wrongness living in the gap between what it sounded like and what it was. It went past fear into something without a name. The laugh meant something. Michael knew it the way the dream made him know things. There was hunger in it. There was waiting. There was a personal interest he had felt before, and the feeling was warm with malice, and the malice knew his name. He looked at the tire swing. He looked at the mailman. He woke up. The Darker Season, Chapter 2, Scene 6. Ironwood. Frank Harmon had 10 years of logs, 11 almost, counting the months before his father died, the months when Frank had been learning the work rather than doing it. Every incident at Ironwood, every manifestation in the hollow, every anomalous reading from the horseshoe wards, every account he had recorded from guests who described something in the night that did not fit the ordinary. He had looked at these records individually for a decade. He had cross-referenced them by type, by season, by location within the hollow. He had drawn the conclusions a competent and careful man could draw, working alone. Harold looked at the same records and saw a different thing. Not because Harold knew more, exactly. Or not only because of that. It was the way Harold's attention worked, the quality of his observation. The fact that he read what was there rather than what a man expected to find. The difference between those two things, in 10 years of Guardian records, was considerable. They were at the desk in the study at 7 in the morning. The day's first light came through the east window. Harold's coffee sat untouched at his elbow. It was always untouched. That had stopped puzzling Frank around week 5. Frank was on his second cup. The maps were spread on the desk. The creek corridor maps he had been assembling since November. The hand-drawn overlays from his father's original survey of the hollow. Harold had added to these across the winter. The additions were precise and unsettling in equal measure. The pattern runs north, Harold said. He put his finger on the creek corridor map at a point south of Ironwood and traced it upstream. Not random, not opportunistic. It has been following a specific route along the cave system. These incidents here in 81, here in 84, these three in 86 and 87. His finger moved to 3 separate points on the overlay. They are not separate events, they are stages. Frank looked at where the finger had ended. That's 8 miles upstream. 9. That's toward the Barlow land. Harold did not say anything. He looked at the map. Frank looked at the map. He had been working toward this conclusion for 2 months, and he had not wanted to arrive at it. Arriving at it meant the creek corridor was not a containment problem. It meant the dark entity's infrastructure ran deeper and further than anything his father's records had described. It meant something upstream the hollow had been building toward, something anchored, something waiting. The dead horseshoe above the lodge door was not a declaration of intent so much as a declaration of progress. He sat back. He opened the bottom drawer of the desk and took out the oldest ledger, his father's handwriting, the entries from 1974 and 1975, the years of building, the years before the watch was formally his. He had read this ledger many times. He had read it again in February with Harold's framework in mind, and he had found the thing he had read past 12 times without understanding what it was. He set it on the desk and turned it to the page and pushed it across to Harold. The entry was dated October 1974. His father's handwriting, smaller and more precise in those years than it became later. A single paragraph describing an anomaly during the construction of the south fence line. The ground at a specific point along the creek bank, his father wrote, had resisted post placement in a way the soil composition did not account for. The posts went in, the fence went up. His father had noted the resistance and moved on. Beside the description, in the margin, a measurement, a depth. His father had probed the anomalous ground and recorded what the probe found before it stopped. Harold read the entry. He did not move while he read it. He read it a second time. He went quiet. The quiet had a specific quality Frank had learned to recognize across the winter. Not the quiet of a man processing information he had expected. The quiet of a man recalibrating. Your father knew something was there, Harold said. He noted it, Frank said. He didn't know what it was. I don't think he let himself know. Harold looked at the measurement in the margin a moment longer. That depth, he said. He did not finish the sentence. He looked at the creek corridor map, at the points he had marked. 1981, 1984, the 3 incidents in 86 and 87. Then he looked at the margin measurement again. He was quiet for a long time. How long? Frank said. It was not quite a question. Harold said, Since before Ironwood, before your father. Frank was quiet for a moment. The 1885 events, Frank said. Before 1885, Harold said. The Barlow property was the door. It has been the door for a long time. What changed in 1885 was that Jacob Barlow opened it from the inside. Frank thought about his father. His father had built Ironwood on land his family had held since the turn of the century. He had built it to do the work in the world without advertising the work. A place where people came for retreat and left with something they could not fully name. His father had known something was in the ground at the south fence. He had recorded it with a careful hand and moved on and not said what he thought it was. He had been a careful man about what he wrote down. The south fence, Frank said. The south fence is the nearest approach point, Harold said. Where the creek corridor meets the hollow's outer boundary. What it has been building there across the last decade has not breached the wards, but it has been testing them. The pressure on Units 9 and 10 in October was not incidental. It came specifically from the south. Frank thought about the horseshoe wards running lower, running like a heater in a colder room. The increased draw, something on the other side pulling harder than it had pulled before. The wards compensating, the compensating costing something. The map was showing him where the problem was going, upstream, along the cave system, toward the Barlow land. The problem was not getting smaller. He pulled a legal pad from the desk drawer and made a note. Not the conclusion. Not yet. The direction. Start with what you know before you say what it means. He had been taught that by his father. He had been practicing it for a decade. He looked at Harold, who was looking at the window. Outside, the spring compound was doing what Ironwood did in April. The dormant grass beginning to find its green. the hollow's tree line showing the first suggestion of leaf cover coming up. The hollow in spring was different from the hollow in winter, a different quality of awareness. More active, more present, something that had been conserving itself for the cold months and was now beginning to move again. "The boy," Harold said. Frank looked at him. "The boy is having the dreams again," Harold said. He said it the way a man reports a weather observation. "They have been getting closer since February. By my reading, they will be significantly more present by June." Frank said, "How do you know that?" Harold said, "Because the dark entity is moving and the boy is connected to it, and I can feel both." Frank looked at the map. He thought about Michael Anderson at 20, working the finishing stage at Hartwell, going to church on Sundays, coming home to his parents' house on Walnut Street. He thought about the boy who had come through the maintenance shed door in March of '85, hollow-eyed and bloody, sitting on the floor of the shed already working out what came next. What he owed that boy was considerable. What he still did not have that would be useful to him was also considerable. The map was showing him where to look for it. He picked up the phone. He held it for a moment. He put it back down. "Not yet," he said. Harold looked at him. Harold's expression did not change. This was characteristic of him. Harold rarely showed surprise at anything, and had long since learned to save his expressions for things that warranted them. "He needs more than 'something is coming,'" Frank said. "I told him something is coming in 1985, and he carried it for 4 years by himself, and it cost him. I'm not putting him back in that position without something concrete to give him." He looked at the map. "The cave system, where it goes, what's upstream. I need to know what we're walking him into before we walk him into it." Harold was quiet. 2 weeks, Frank said. "Maybe 3. We follow the corridor north. We see what we find. We bring him in with something in hand." Harold said, "The dark entity is not waiting on your schedule." "I know," Frank said. He did know. He had known since October, since the dead horseshoe, since the quality of the hollow's silence had shifted from watchful to anticipatory. He was running the edge of the timeline. Harold's disagreement was not wrong, but he looked at the map and thought about Michael Anderson's face in 1985, the specific quality of a boy who had been told the truth without enough context to do anything with it, and he could not make himself pick up that phone today. He stood. He rolled the map. He set it in the cylinder with the others. "South fence," he said. "Then upstream. We start this morning." Harold stood. He took his coat from the hook by the door. He did not say Frank was right. He did not say Frank was wrong. He went to the door and waited, agreeing to the immediate thing while keeping the larger disagreement intact. Frank followed him out into the April morning. The hollow was awake around them. The creek was running at the right pitch for spring. The sound of it came from the south. Above them, the sky was doing what Ohio April skies did, a clean blue that had nothing in common with the air in a dream. Frank did not think about the phone. He walked south across the compound, toward the fence line, toward the creek corridor, toward the thread that was going to tell him what he needed to know before he made the call he was going to have to make. He put his mind on the work. That was what there was. That was what there had always been.